All right, I want to now move on to Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers. So Bryce Young, 2023 first round draft pick to the Carolina Panthers, first overall pick in the draft. The Panthers have now completely hit the reset button, new coaching staff, hopefully a star quarterback in Bryce Young. And look, I've said it before, I'm going to continue to preach it because a lot of people can't understand this. Most quarterbacks will only perform as good as the parts around them. Keep in mind, Matthew Stafford was what some people thought was a generational arm talent coming out of Georgia, and he had a losing record in Detroit. And the minute Matthew Stafford left the dysfunctional, unorganized mess that was the Detroit Lions at times, Matthew Stafford immediately won a Super Bowl. That should tell you all you need to know. I like what the Panthers have. However, there is some big questions still that need to be answered, but I don't want to talk about those things. I want to talk about Bryce Young specifically. What are the pros and cons of Bryce Young's game? Let's talk about it. What worries me? What are the cons of Bryce Young? First of all, it's pretty obvious. His size. He's tiny. And everyone talks about, oh, what about Drew Brees? What about Russell Wilson? What about Kyler Murray? What about Baker Mayfield? For all the guys that are short quarterbacks that have had success in the NFL, and those guys have definitely had success, some more than others, what we don't talk about is how many quarterbacks do not succeed because they lack the requisite size to be an NFL starting quarterback. Listen, people, we can talk about, oh, you got to try hard in sports. If you work hard, you're going to make it, Johnny. Johnny, I'm sorry to break it to you, but in order to make it in Major League Baseball, you have to be able to hit a 95-mile-per-hour fastball. That's like the bare minimum. You just have to do it. Okay, if you can't hit a 95-mile-per-hour fastball in Major League Baseball, I've got no room for you probably as a scout or GM. That's just the reality. And usually as an NFL quarterback, they come in all shapes and sizes. But for the most part, a lot of NFL quarterbacks are a lot bigger and taller than 5'10", pardon me. And when it comes to Bryce Young, he could be overwhelmed because of his lack of size, okay? And I do have durability concerns regarding Bryce Young. And because Bryce Young is on the smaller side of things regarding his size, he is going to have to really work on getting in the film room and being a step ahead of the defense. He virtually has to be more perfect than a guy like Lamar Jackson, where Lamar Jackson, he's this big athlete, can run around and make plays, and he doesn't have to study as much film as Bryce Young because he's just such a special athlete. Josh Allen doesn't have to be perfect with his mechanics because his arm is so strong, and he's such a big, imposing physical specimen at the position. Ben Roethlisberger, for years, didn't work out, in the offseason by some reports. Some people said he kind of mailed it in and just played golf and drank beer. And it worked fine for Ben Roethlisberger because he could get away with that. Bryce Young has to be an exception. And sometimes trying to be an exception, it's hard, okay? And listen, like I said, he's got to really dive into that playbook because he doesn't have the get-out-of-jail-free cards that Rodgers and Mahomes has. He's a very creative passer, and we'll get into that. But I think you get my point. I do have concerns about his potential durability because he's a smaller body, and if he's getting hit a lot, I have a lot of concerns about how his body will be able to hold up in the NFL. Now, the pros of Bryce Young, he's a very creative passer. And what do I mean by that? Bryce Young, he's a guy that can scramble around and just make things happen. His pocket presence is really, really good. He's a very self-aware player. He knows his limitations because the thing about Bryce Young is he's been small his entire life playing quarterback. Like, this is nothing new for Bryce Young. He knows his physical limitations. And Bryce Young's football IQ, from all the things that I've observed, is pretty good. It passes the test. It seems like Bryce Young in college was always a step ahead of the defense. And that's very key. That's something you like to see. And we talk about the injury concerns. Look, I do believe those things are real, okay? But Bryce Young at times gets the ball out of his hands so quickly that, like I said, he's just ahead of the defense, and he's a very self-aware player. He does not consistently put his body in harm's way. He knows he's not Ben Roethlisberger. He knows he's not Cam Newton. He knows he's not Josh Allen. where he's going to live to fight another day if need be. He's going to slide. He's going to try to avoid those hits. He's going to get the ball out of his hands very quickly if it all pans out. And if you're not getting hit a lot, then it doesn't really matter about the injury concerns, in my opinion, because like I said, if you can avoid the big hits, I feel much more better about Bryce Young. Very similar to the likes of Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson, Bryce Young knows how to protect himself. Now, obviously, you're taking a gamble with drafting Bryce Young because of his size, where injuries could pop up. But if Bryce Young is a hit, when he's on the field, this is a guy that has a chance to really change your NFL franchise, at least for the time being, for a small window. Let's play the safe side, because I'm not the type of person that comes on here and says, oh yeah, this guy, you're going to have a 20-year NFL career, going to crush it. I like to see guys kind of play their career out. However, there are exceptions, I will say. But again, when you look at Bryce Young, his final year at Alabama even, the talent on the field wasn't as good in years past, and Alabama was still winning games because Bryce Young, when he's at his best, he's an awesome quarterback. And I think he has a chance to really succeed in the NFL if he really, gets the pieces around him. And just, from what you hear from the Panthers organization, whether it be coaches at Alabama, again, they'll probably talk about regardless, but you just get the sense that Bryce Young is going to do everything in his power to be a great leader, to really put in the time in the film room. I get grown-up vibes from Bryce Young. I got party man vibes from a guy like Johnny Manziel. So, again, these are the pros and cons of Bryce Young. I'm excited to see what he can be in the NFL. What is his ceiling? Potentially a top 10 quarterback. If he really hits, I think he could potentially be a top 10 quarterback. If he is a bust, it's just going to be one of those things where he's overwhelmed by the speed and size of NFL defenses, can't make the adjustments, can't ever stay healthy, and for whatever reason, the talent just maybe isn't as eye-popping as we're willing to make it out to be. But I'm willing to give Bryce Young a chance. I do not condone the Panthers for drafting him. I was a big CJ Stroud fan, but to me, the grades were very similar between the two players as far as Bryce Young and CJ Stroud was concerned. So, yeah, for that reason, I'm excited to see what Bryce Young does for the Carolina Panthers. And dare I say, could he be the greatest Panthers quarterback ever, maybe ahead of Cam Newton? I'm going to pause on that for now, just because Cam Newton, to me, was a generational talent, was a grown man in college. To me, he had more physical tools than Bryce Young. But the thing is, Cam Newton never seemed to really iron out his weaknesses. If Bryce Young can be a guy that hones in and improves on his weaknesses as time goes on, I think he can give Cam Newton at least a run for his money. That's how I feel.